Hello, I'm Anthony. Welcome back to the Arturia SEM-V tutorial series. Today we're going to have a look at the remainder of the advanced sections. We've got a couple here, modulation and effects, and we'll also have a look at the macro controls. If you're enjoying this series, check out the Patreon and YouTube channel member links below. Awesome way to help support the channel. Okay, what's the modulation matrix all about? Well, it's a means by which we can tie modulation sources to destinations. Here's a perfect example. This preset that we've been using for the majority of this video series, the sawtooth wave, has some modulation baked into the sound. The modulation wheel is mapped to the BCF frequency. If I turn the mod wheel all the way down, turn it up, you can hear and see all of those high frequencies being rolled off. That's being accomplished by this mapping here. The mod wheel, here are our various modulation sources, is being mapped to VCF frequency in a negative amount. In other words, when the control is down, the knob is turned up, and vice versa. If I set this to 100%, it's basically going to modulate this knob as hard as it can. So control turned all the way down, still no effect at all, but now turning it all the way up rolls all of those frequencies off, and it's as if you turn the knob down to 0. If we set the modulation to 50%, here's off, here's on, and now we have a gentler roll off because the maximum extent of the thing on the left hand side is only having a 50% effect on the thing on the right hand side. As a general rule of thumb, I try to use positive modulation values rather than negative because I just can't handle flipping everything around in my brain. So now I would need to know that the modulation wheel being off is dull and on is bright. And that's much easier for my brain to understand. I understand why they flipped it, because the modulation wheel typically is off, and that means it's having no effect on the filter, but that's just a personal thing. Get rid of that, have a look at the next control down. Here we've got LFO2 mapped to the same cutoff value, but you can see that in this case the modulation value is 0. So at the moment it's having no effect. Let's crank some in and see what it does. So that's as if you were doing this. If we have negative modulation, it's going to have a very similar effect, just the other way around. Other than that, the matrix in this system is pretty straightforward. Let's have a look at the range of options available to us. So this is where we would apply pitch modulation if I want to map it to VCO1. And that's it, 8 slots to play with. Don't need to say any more than that. The effects bank is basically an extension of the original unit. So here we've got our effects. The on-off buttons on the front interface basically mirror these controls in the advanced page. So you can see those two controls toggling together. Overdrive is pretty straightforward. The amount of drive, which is going to be saturation or distortion. And damping is like basically a tonal effect. If I turn damping off, we're going to get a sound as bright. You can hear that brashness coming in, that's the overdrive. If I turn damping up, it's going to attenuate the high frequencies. See it pulling those high frequencies away? It just softens the sound. It's like an extra filter bank. Chorus and delay are pretty much ubiquitous, so we don't really need to spend very much time talking about this, except to say it's unusual to see a feedback control in a chorus unit. You can hear that stereo effect coming from this spread control. And if you dial feedback into a chorus effect, it becomes more akin to flange. Now, in order to get a genuine flanging effect, we'd need delay offsets smaller than this device is capable of generating. Flange basically takes over at about like 15 milliseconds and below. That's the only difference between a flanger and a chorus. Chorus basically have typically larger delay offsets than this minimum even is. I would be looking to set a delay time of between 50 and 100 milliseconds for a chorus. This goes down to 230, which is a bit odd. You can hear as I change the delay effect, You get all sorts of weird, almost pseudo-phasing effects. Interesting. I don't particularly tend to play with onboard chorus effects very often. I'll generally leave that to my outboard stuff. And then delay is delay. Everybody knows what that is. The other set of advanced options that we can play with are in the little settings cog. Yeah, you can just about see it. I'll move this over to the left. In the macro screen, we've got 4 configurable controls that we can play with. And again, these are permanently on. They're doing stuff right now. If you click on the knobs themselves, you can see what they're currently mapped to. So this time knob, you can see that it's going to be playing with the decay levels for both of the envelopes. In other words, if I turn this knob up, the decay and release cycles of both of the envelopes are going to go up. There's the standard sound, and there's the release coming in. Here's timbre mapped to resonance. But they are actually fully configurable. Let's call this one pitch mod and get rid of its current mapping. I'm going to right click and then select delete. So I've thrown that mapping away. So now we're playing with pitch modulation. Well, how do we map pitch modulation into this control? I'm going to click learn and then select the control, just left click the control I want to map to. And this is an example where negative modulation can be useful. See this little angle bracket here? Let's press that and it opens up an edit box. Now without doing anything else, I'm going to press a key on the keyboard. And you can see that as I turn this knob, it's basically mirroring itself exactly on this modulation control. But I want to affect frequency modulation, which is only half of this control's range. Well, that's easy enough to do. Go into the maximum value and set it to 0.5. So now the range on this knob operates between 12 o'clock and 0. The outstanding problem that I've still got though is that when the knob's turned all the way down, modulation's at maximum, and when I turn it all the way up, modulation's at minimum. Well, that's clearly unintuitive. So this is one of those situations where I'm perfectly happy to invert the modulation, and now minimum on the macro is going to be maximum on the modulation knob. We can add any number of controls to each of these macro controls. So I could click learn again and do exactly the same with oscillator 2 mod amount, and then both of those controls will be mapped to the same knob. You can see that these are actually multi-point graphs. So even though this would make absolutely no sense in the current context, you could have absolutely ridiculous pitch mappings. Let's get rid of this one. Bring oscillator 2 in and see how ridiculous that is. So you can see it's varying between frequency modulation and pitch modulation and pulse width modulation. Doesn't make much sense, but at least it demonstrates that you've got an awful lot of flexibility with these macros and you can throw lots of different functions into them. That'll do us for today. Hope you enjoyed the episode. If you did, please hit the like button and I'll see you for the next one. Thanks very much.